Hello, friends and colleagues. I hope you're doing well. My name is Kevin Dill. I'm a behavior specialist. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the most powerful practices, principles, techniques, and strategies of the behavior skilled teacher. Here's one thing that I've learned in working in the area of behavior in school systems for over 30 years, that we don't have to do a lot. In fact, a lot of teachers that I work with, they get into this trap called spray and pray. Have you ever been in that trap where you spray a lot of strategies and you pray and hope that one of them works to prevent behavior or help you deal with behavior in the moment? Many of us get into that trap. I've been in that trap. But here's what I've learned. We don't have to do a lot of different strategies and techniques, although there's many out there. But we have to do a few really, really well. And that's what I'm going to show you today. What are those few strategies that if you're a teacher, paraprofessional, support personnel, maybe a school leader, administrator, to make sure that you're doing really, really well and you focus on these. And if you do, you're going to be highly, highly effective. So let's dive into it. Well, let me give you a little bit of background on me. In 1992, I became a teacher. When I came out of college to become a teacher in 1992, I couldn't find a job. It was really, really difficult because there were so many candidates coming out of college to be teachers. In fact, if you were looking for a teaching position, you were competing with hundreds of other candidates. Even in the area of special ed, I was competing with 60, 70 different candidates for one teaching position. I finally got my first teaching position at Metamora High School, and I was teaching students who had lots of challenging behaviors. One of my students, Brian B., was a felon. He was one of the nicest kids in my class. I had some kids who would stick cats in their microwaves to see what would happen to the cat. These students had really, really challenging behaviors, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. In fact, I really hated that job. I hated it so much. I remember walking out into the parking lot after school at 4 o'clock, getting into my car, taking a deep breath and thinking, I'm going to go sell insurance or work at Taco Bell or something other than this. This is crazy. Well, I taught for a number of years, and then there was a transformation that happened in me. And that transformation was that teaching became a career. It used to be a job. For the first 4 or 5 years of teaching, it was just a job. But then it became a career. And that may have happened to you. When teaching becomes a career, you dive into it. And I dove into it. I went back to school. I wanted to understand behavior. I wanted to understand, why do students in schools behave the way they do? When you look at them and say, be quiet, why do they say, I am quiet? Or why do they flip you off and or leave the room and flip tables over and refuse to do work and shut their Chromebook, and the list goes on and on. But I also wanted to know, what could we do about it as teachers, as educators? Turns out there's a lot. But again, it's a few things that we have to do really, really well. I taught for a number of years, and then I jokingly always say this: I must have been smoking or drinking something one night, which I don't do. But I decided to become a principal, which is a crazy thing. This is a picture of me as a principal at Tremont Elementary School. We had about 350 students, maybe sometimes 375, depending upon the year. We had about 3 sections per grade level, pre-K through 5th grade. Sometimes we'd have 4 sections if we'd have a bubble class. But let me tell you about my first day as a principal on August 16th. Where I live in Illinois, in August, it's hot and humid. The corn has to have enough heat units to grow. That's why we grow a lot of corn in Illinois. But my building didn't have air conditioning. There were only 2 locations in my building that had air conditioning: my office and the tech lab. So during that first week of school, in August, my first week as a principal, we were on a heat schedule, which meant that we went to school from 8:15 to 11:15, and then we dismissed and had the afternoon off. And we were hoping that the weather would break and get a little bit cooler, less humid, and then the next week we could go to school full time. Remember, we didn't have air conditioning in our building. Well, let me tell you about the first day. And if you've ever worked in an elementary school, you know how that first day can get a little crazy. Well, this first day, my first day as a principal, got really, really crazy. At 11:15, we dismissed all the students, and a little bit of chaos happened. Maybe a lot of chaos. We had students who got on the bus that shouldn't have got on the bus, and we had students who didn't get on the bus that should have got on the bus, and we had parents that didn't pick their kids up at 11:15 because I guess they didn't read the email that we sent out 30 times. And we were calling emergency contacts in the office to pick these kids up. Well, finally, after about, 20 minutes or 30 minutes, we got everything settled. And we found out all the kids were back home in the places they need to be. And so we were good. So I went into my office and I sat down in the air conditioning to take a little breather after the chaos. And there was a knock on my door. And my door slightly opened. And it was Miss Tyra, a third grade teacher, wonderful person. She had this little note in her hand. And she said, "Mr. Dill, can I come in?" I said, "Absolutely. Come on in, Miss Tyra." She comes into my office and she holds the note out in front of her. And she said, "This note was left under the windshield wiper of your car." And then she asked this question: "Have you seen your car?" And I said, "No, I haven't seen my car." And she said, "You may want to go see your car." Well, I got up from my desk chair, I grabbed the note, I came out of the office door, which is, you see that in the screen off to the right there. And my car was parked behind that bus in a special parking spot that had a special sign that said principal's parking. And when I looked at it, I was in awe. My car was totally destroyed. My tires were flattened, they were knifed. My car was knifed on the sides, the roof, the hood, the trunk. There was black permanent marker all over my car. And I started to read that note, and it had misspelled words like "fook you." And I'm like, all right, if you're going to do this, do it correctly. Well, that was my first day as principal. And we had our first staff meeting, not in the tech lab where there was air conditioning. We had our first staff meeting outside, circled up around my car. And I told the teachers and staff as we circled up around my destroyed car, I told them this: I don't know you very well and you don't know me very well. But I will tell you this: I really don't care if you've been teaching here for 30 minutes or 30 days or 30 years. It doesn't matter to me, because we are going to do things different. From this point forward, we have to do things different. And here's why. Because every system is currently perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. Whatever's happening in your system or not happening in your system is going to get you results. And on the first day, our system got those results. Well, that set us on about a decade or so of being focused on behavior. And we tried lots of different system-wide behavioral approaches. You've probably heard of some of those. Positive Behavioral Intervention Support System, or PBIS, 1-2-3 Magic, Conscious Discipline, Boys Town. We tried restorative practices. We tried many, many, many. And we took data on the effectiveness of those. And we found over 10 years, the number one most powerful, most effective strategy that you can use with any kid at any age, at any grade level, with any behavior in any location. And it's you. And it's me. That's right. There's nothing else that comes close to the teacher's approach with behavior. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Your teacher approach, because it is the most powerful. I've studied teacher approaches with behavior for many, many years. And here's what I have found, that when we're teaching, supporting, dealing with students who have challenging behavior, our approach can get off balance. That's right. The number one key element with our approach is to keep it balanced. So think about this line in front of you as a teeter-totter, not a continuum. And that teeter-totter has to stay balanced. But sometimes we can get off balance with our approach. So I'm going to go through the two extreme approaches that will let us know we are off balance with our approach. And the first one is the weak and permissive approach. Teachers who take this approach, they have some certain characteristics that are really, really common, and they're patternized. The first element of a weak and permissive teacher approach is that they love kids. Now, I think we should love kids. I think without loving our students, we're not going to go very far with behavior. We have to have a connection. We have to show them that we care. We certainly have to be patient. We have to listen to them. All of those wonderful things that a relationship is about. But these teachers believe that love will cure all behavior. They think if I just am kind enough, compassionate enough, if I love them enough, eventually they will come around. Maybe in April, but they will eventually come around and start cooperating with me. We know that's not true. Like, we should love kids, but love is not going to cure all behavior. The second characteristic is that they have shifting expectations. Their expectations shift. And this can be really sneaky. We can almost be blind to it, that our expectations are shifting or changing. And a key strategy when you're dealing with behavior is to make sure that you are consistent with your expectations. Now, I know this may sound very basic, very elementary, very benign, but it is really, really important. I was coaching a kindergarten teacher last year, and here's what happened when I was in her classroom. She called all the kids, all her students up to the rug, and she was going to show them something on the board. So she said, hey, everybody, come up and get on your spots on the rug. I want to show you something on the board. So all the kids came up to the rug, and she sat down and pointed to the board. And she said, well, who's got the answer for number one? Raise your hand, she said. None of the students raised their hand. So she said, all right, somebody just shout it out. Just shout it out if you know the answer. That's an example of a shifting expectation. And the kids that I work with, the really challenging kids, I call them crackheads. Not because they're smoking crack cocaine, but because they find the crack. And that's where they find the crack, in your expectations. And if your expectations change and you're blind to it, they will find the crack. Another element is that they issue many, many warnings. This is called the warning trap. So instead of correcting behavior, they actually issue warnings and let behavior continue. So the warning trap sounds like this. Shh, shh. I'm not going to tell you again. I've already told you twice. Shh. You should, Connor. Shh. Okay, I'll wait. And if I'm in the classroom in the back watching, I'll probably say something like this. What are you waiting for? No, I wouldn't do that. But that's what I'm thinking. What are you waiting for? There needs to be a correction. There was an infraction of behavior. Don't just warn them. Move to a correction. There has to be a correction for misbehavior. If you don't correct misbehavior and you allow and permit it to occur, you actually reinforce it to occur again. The warning trap is dangerous because eventually the teacher will blow because they can't take it anymore. They've issued so many warnings that finally they just blow up like a volcano. And how I know that in the office as a principal is because I'll get 5 office referrals from their classroom in one morning. That's when I know they've blown. So that is the weak and permissive teacher approach. We love kids, but we think that love's going to cure all behavior. Our expectations shift frequently, and we're not consistent. We're inconsistent, and sometimes we're unclear with those expectations. And then they issue a lot of warnings. Instead of corrections, they issue warnings until they can't take it anymore because the behavior continues because they just reinforced it through the warnings. And then they end up blowing. Now we're going to talk about the other side of this teeter-totter, which is the hostile punitive approach. The other side of this teeter-totter of off-balanced approaches is the hostile punitive approach. And these teachers have certain patterns of characteristics as well. Number one is they blame everybody else for a student's behavior. They first blame the student. Something must be wrong with them. Didn't take their medication. Kids got ADHD. I mean, pick a D. LD, BD, ED, ADHD, OCD, ODD. Most of them are BAD, but pick a D. And then they blame the parents. These parents just need to parent. And I'm not saying that there's something drastically going on with parents these days, because one of the challenges we have in schools is kids who are coming from gentle parenting or permissive parenting, where there are no boundaries or there are a lack of boundaries and there's no correction. And then these students come to our schools and we have boundaries, we have limits, we have expectations. And they're met with those and they throw a fit because they're not conditioned to have boundaries. They're conditioned to kind of do whatever they want without boundaries. So these teachers then also blame the administration. I send a kid down to the office and 20 minutes later, the kid's back in my room. Nothing's changed except they have Skittles. I'd love to get Skittles. Then they blame the teachers in the grade levels below them. What are those teachers down there doing? They're not preparing these kids for our grade level. Then they blame the Board of Education and Trump, and they blame everybody. They never look at themselves as maybe there's something going on with their approach, and maybe they need to adjust their approach. Secondly, they demand submission. Instead of influencing a student, instead of training a student for cooperation and compliance, they demand submission. And they use words that are considered demanding submission phrases like, Connor, you need to close your Chromebook right now. Or Samantha, I need you to line up and keep your hands and feet and body to self. And when they use those phrases that are demanding submission, I need you to, you need to, those are called war words. They can create conflict. They can create war because they are probably dealing with students who function on power and control. And when a student functions on power and control, and they come from a place of no boundaries or a lack of boundaries, a permissive parenting household, there's going to be some problems. They're also inflexible. Now, the bright spot is that they're very consistent with expectation. I mean, their no is no, and their yes is yes, and that's about it. So they're very consistent, and they're very clear, but they're inflexible. They don't flex with a student when behavior's happening, and all behavior is different. You know, if I'm off task in your class, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm disruptive. That doesn't mean I'm disrespectful. That doesn't mean I'm destructive. So all behavior is different, and we have to observe behavior as being different, and we have to respond differently. These teachers, because they're inflexible, they react to behavior, they don't respond to behavior. And there is a difference between reacting and responding. So they're inflexible. And if a kid needs a reset, they don't think about a reset. They just send them to the office or keep them in from recess. Sometimes they need a redo, or sometimes you need to set limits. Sometimes you need to have a conversation. So this teacher approach is very, very inflexible. And then they typically overreact immediately when there is a lack of cooperation or there's noncompliance or defiance. And again, the key is they react, not respond. And when they react, it's usually an overreaction. And that's when they can say and do some really ineffective things. Contrary to that, the weak and permissive teacher approach, it takes a little bit of time for them to eventually blow and overreact, where a hostile punitive teacher will react immediately. So now you know the two extremes. There's other characteristics, but those are the common patternized characteristics of these two approaches. So what approach should we take? What's the balanced approach? I'm going to show you that right now. Have you ever eaten a piece of licorice like a Twizzler or a piece of caramel? If you have, you know it's both firm and flexible simultaneously. There's some firmness to it, but yet there's some flexibility, and that's the balanced approach with behavior. If we stay in this balanced approach, we're going to be off to a really, really good start with preventing behavior, but also responding to behavior when it happens. I call this approach teaching like a Twizzler. So I don't want to be too weak and permissive, and I definitely don't want to be hostile and punitive. I want to be firm and flexible. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look. The firm part of being a Twizzler teacher means that we are clear and consistent with our expectations, which leads us to be able to hold the boundary, not the battle. There's an old saying in behavior, hold the boundary, not the battle. I'm not going to battle with you. Hostile, punitive teachers, they like to battle. But Twizzler teachers understand, I'm not going to battle with you. I have a lot of teachers who tell me, you got to pick your battles with this kid. And I'll look at them and say, well, there are no battles to pick. We're not going to have any battles here. There are only expectations to meet and expectations to not meet. That's the student's choice, to meet or not meet expectations. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to preach to you. I'm not going to question you. I'm not going to warn you. These are the expectations. And firmness means that I don't allow students to negotiate those expectations. And by the way, the crackheads that I work with, the kids who find the crack, that's what they'll do. They'll negotiate with weak and permissive teachers. And they negotiate through a technique that they use called tactics, which I'll explain in a little while. So the firm part is clear and consistent. I'm going to hold the boundary, and I'm not going to allow a student to negotiate those through tactics. But I'm also flexible. Flexible means that I respond to behavior with strategy, not with emotion. I don't flip my lid as a teacher. I understand that noncompliance, defiance, infractions are going to happen. That's just a part of it. But that doesn't mean that I have to battle with you, doesn't mean I have to flip my lid and yell at you and preach to you. It doesn't mean I have to go the most extreme consequence for you. It means that I have to read your behavior in the moment and I have to flex my response to your behavior in the moment. So again, if some students are distracted, then I might just do a little redirect with them. If a student is not compliant, I might nudge them. If a student is defiant, I'm probably going to set a limit with them. If a kid's in the basement of their brain and they're stuck, I'm probably going to have a conversation with them. So there's lots of different responses that I could choose as a teacher when a student is misbehaving, but I have to read the behavior in the moment and flex my strategy or my response accordingly to that behavior. That's the balanced approach. So along with our firm and simultaneously flexible approach, I like to use habits. Habits are sort of this tailwind, not a headwind. We have a lot of headwinds against us, but habits help promote cooperation. They help promote a training of compliance. They help promote peace in the classroom and in the school. But you have to work on habits. You have to develop those habits. I call these thinking and action habits. Now, there are some habits that I have that I'm trying to get rid of working with kids. Demanding submission is one of those. And, there's only a few times that we demand submission from students, like if they're running across the street and we're going to demand to stop, or they're getting into a fight and we're going to demand stop. Outside of those type of safety situations, I'm always trying to train for compliance rather than demand submission. So that's a habit that I'm trying to get rid of and do less of, demanding submission, and a habit of training for compliance I'm trying to work on a little bit more. I'm not quite there yet. And by the way, there's no perfect teacher, there's no perfect student, there's no perfect school. These are just parts of our practice that we continue to improve and work on. And here's why, because the work we do is really, really complex because we're dealing with human beings, and they have thinking patterns and they have emotions and they have characteristics, and some of them come from trauma and some of them have disorders, and the students. So the work we do is really, really complex. So give yourself a lot of grace, a lot of margin to improve, constantly reflect on your practices. And habits are helpful if they're good habits, and they're, again, kind of tailwinds. They sort of help push and promote. And the habits, once they're developed, you really don't have to think about them. When I leave a room and shut off the lights, I don't really have to think about it much. It's just kind of a habit I've gotten into. So over the next couple slides, here are some habits maybe to think about developing if you haven't already developed them. One is prioritize kids over content. Many of us are content specialists, but kids, they never do say, you're a great content specialist. They say things like, you listen to me and you connect with me and I can talk to you about things, and that's what they say. So it's always about kids over content. Also, train for compliance. Don't demand submission. Demanding submission gets into those war words like, I need you to, and you will, and you must, and you have to. And then be invited to teach. You're going to invite them to learn every minute of the day, but that doesn't mean they're learning. So invite them, be invited to teach. That means develop a relationship with them. Okay, when they're outside of your class, I want them to think, my kids, when they were outside of my class, I wanted them to think, I can't wait to get back there. So I have a question for you. Would your students pay to come to your class? If they could buy a ticket at the beginning of the day to go to any class, would they come to yours? Would they buy that ticket to come to your class? Is there joy in your class? Remember, no joy, no work. Do they feel connected with you? Yes, we're going to have them do some complex things and learn new skills and maybe some really challenging cognitive things that, when they're learning new things, and it's hard work, but is there joy in that? Do they find that you're peaceful, or are you full of bitterness and, resentfulness and irritation? Do they find that you're patient? In other words, have a relationship with them and spend time with them. Someone once said to me, it's about quality relationships. I'm like, yeah, it is. But to get to quality, you also have to have quantity. So you have to spend time with them. And some of the most challenging kids that you have, in order to get an invitation to teach them before you teach them, you have to develop that relationship. You have to spend time with them. You have to get to know them. Part of developing that relationship with all students, but especially students with behavior challenges, is don't ever take anything personal. Um, if it starts to get under your skin and you become irritated and frustrated, and we all do, but if you really, really take things personal, then you're going to react to behavior, not respond to behavior. Also, another habit I have is to model, model, model. Remember this, more is caught than taught with behavior. So I was at a large high school in Staten Island, New York, a couple of years ago doing this training. There was about 300 teachers and staff in the audience. And I got to the section where I said, we have to model, model, model. Model, behavior has to be modeled, has to be taught, has to be corrected and reinforced. And I said, if you want them to be on time, you have to be on time. If you want them to be prepared, you have to be prepared. And then I threw this out there. I said, if you want them to use responsible, respectful language, dignified language, then you have to use it too. And as soon as I said that, the union rep in the audience stood up, and with a New York accent, which I can't do, he said, Dill's right. If we want the kids to stop saying the F-bomb, then we have to stop saying it. I turned to the principal, who was sitting in the front row, and I said, well, you can cut my check right now and I'll fly home, because you just figured out a major part of your problem. And then remember that behavior takes a long time to change. You're not going to get a new kid by Friday. And this is about being patient. It's about endurance. It's a long, long journey. Changing behavior is more of a crock pot than a microwave. It's not gonna, we want a quick fix to behavior, but most behavior, if we're trying to shape it and change it, takes a long time. That's why we have to be consistent. We have to be clear. We have to model. We have to be balanced. And so when behavior happens, just remember it's a part of the journey. Don't hang on to it. If you do, it'll get under your skin. I have this little habit called brush and flush. When behavior happens, I sort of deal with it in terms of correction and keep myself regulated. Don't get emotionally charged. Don't take things personal. And then I brush it and flush it, and we move on. And many of these students, if not all of them, that I work with and that you work with, they need a new minute. They need a new day. And sometimes it's a new minute. That's over. And we've dealt with that in terms of correction. Let's move on. I'm not going to hold it against you. I'm not going to take it personally. And we're going to move forward. That's really hard to do. Easy for me to say, and that's sort of like with behavior. It's easy when it's not you dealing with it. When somebody else is dealing with it, it's easy to say things like this. But these are habits, both thinking and action habits, that will help you and your students along the way. We have a choice either to do things with students or to students. I can say, well, I'm going to keep you in from recess, or I'm giving you a detention. And that's doing it to them. I like to do things with them. Things like having a conversation, not to them. It's not a monologue. Conversation is a dialogue. And when I show you a ladder of limits, a conversation, that's a strategy we use, a corrective strategy. That's pretty powerful. And that's when we do it with students. If you have a conversation to a student, you're probably going to get into the preaching trap. And I've done that many, many times, where I'm just preaching to them about everything they've done, bad and incorrect, and things that they haven't done correct. And they will armor up pretty quick. And in order for them to receive correction and to learn from correction, they have to be open and receptive. And if they're not open and receptive, they're not going to learn from correction. None of us do. Another habit is that I like to step back before I step in when a behavior occurs. And what that means is, just for a second or two or three, I'm going to step back and just consider, why is the behavior happening? Like, did the kid not sleep last night, and are they tired and irritable? Did they not eat? Were they up all night because their parents were arguing with each other? Is this the fourth home that they've moved to? Did they sleep in the car last night? None of those things could have happened. Um, but just the fact that I stepped back for just a little bit of time and thought about it before I stepped into the behavior gives me a little bit of space to think about how am I going to address this behavior. Some of us, and I've done it, we step into a behavior very, very quickly. And we can say and do some ineffective things. So step back before you step in and just consider, why is this happening? And then remember, if there's no joy, there's no work. And if you don't bring joy into your class, and of course that comes along with relationships and engagement and fun and playfulness and all of that. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have some really hard work to do, because we do in classrooms, but there also can be joy. Do you create joy? Do your students find joy when they come into your class? Because remember, no joy, no work. A lot of teachers, especially at the upper elementary to secondary levels, ask me, what is this about student motivation? Like, students aren't motivated anymore. How can I motivate them? And, one of the first questions I'll ask is, would they pay a ticket to come to your class? And then the second one is, how do you create joy in your class? Do students enjoy being there? Do they enjoy participating? Do they enjoy it? Is there joy? Because students are motivated. They're called functions of behavior or motives of behavior. They're motivated to escape. They're motivated to get attention. They're motivated to have power and control. They're motivated to get something. It's not that students aren't motivated. They're just not motivated in the way you want them to be motivated, to do their work and to be cooperative and to meet expectations. But without joy, we're really not getting anywhere with students in terms of behavior. Many teachers that I train and coach in the classroom with behavior, they will report to me that they have very clear and consistent expectations. However, when I go in to observe in their classrooms and report out to them during the debriefing session, I will point out that their expectations are unclear and inconsistent. And they're in shock because in their minds, they're estimating that their expectations are very clear and consistent. This is an area that when behavior starts, this is the pain point area where it first begins. It's when there is an unclear expectation or an inconsistent expectation. By the way, notice I didn't use the word rule. I typically don't use the word rules with the kids that I work with, because rules are meant to be broken or badly bent, or they make up their own rules. But I do like to use the phrase expectation. You'll hear that a lot from me, especially when it comes to responding to behavior and we set limits. I'll model that toward the end of the training today. So let's get back to clear and consistent and common expectations. This is an area that we can check to see if we're doing well. And this is an area we need to do really, really well in. Many schools that I work with, they claim to have clear expectations, but they really have values. For example, have you ever heard of the 3 B's? Be responsible, be respectful, be safe. Those are pretty common. And those are expectations, but in the behavior world, those are values. They're kind of like what my head and my heart should do. But the hands and feet, like what I should actively do, those are expectations. They're very concise, they're very clear, they're very in the moment. And so if you're a teacher, for example, who says, shh, be quiet, you are unclear and you are reacting to behavior, not responding to it. Sometimes I'll be in classrooms and the teacher will say, shh, quiet, shh. I shouldn't have, shh. There should be no chattering, shh. Quiet, please. And I'll ask the teacher, they seem like they are quietly talking. What is the expectation here? Is it to be silent? Yeah, yeah, no talking. Then why don't you say that? Just be very clear with your expectation. You see how tricky this can get? So over a career, I've been looking for very, very clear expectations, and I finally found some a number of years ago, and they're called CHAMPS. They're in front of you. Now, CHAMPS is an acronym that stands for conversation level, how do I ask for help, what's the activity we're doing, how do I move during this activity, how do I participate, and then what does it mean to be successful at this particular activity? So conversation level has to deal with noise level. And usually with CHAMPS trained teachers, you will not hear them say, shh, be quiet. You'll hear them say, level 0 silent. Or when they want them to be quiet, they might say, level 2 whisper. Or if they're working with a partner, they might say, level 1 partner talk. Or level 3 presentation. So they train students. And remember, we're always about training for compliance or training for cooperation. We're training students what the noise level is during that particular activity. The H is, how do I ask for help during this activity? Do I raise my hand? Do I put a sign out that says, hey, I'm still working, but I need help? Do I ask my partner before I ask the teacher? There might be several different ways to ask for help during this particular activity. Speaking of the activity, what activity are we doing? Are we doing whole group? Are we in partners, working in partners? Are we in centers right now? Are we lining up? Are we entering the classroom or exiting the classroom? Are we taking a test? Are we doing catch-up work? What's the activity that we're actually doing? And then the M is, well, how do I move? Can I get up and get a Kleenex without asking permission and walk like a turtle as slow as can be because I want to avoid and escape this? Can I go sharpen my pencil or plug in my Chromebook without asking permission? Or during this activity, do I have to ask permission before I get up and leave my seat? The P is, how am I supposed to participate in this particular activity? If it's whole group and I have to stay in my seat and only leave my seat with permission, then what am I supposed to do to participate? Am I supposed to follow the outline on the board? Am I supposed to complete my worksheet? Am I supposed to take notes? Am I supposed to read along? What exactly is the activity that we're doing? You can kind of tell by how I'm talking how specific the expectations are in CHAMPS. And you can compare that to the 3 Bs. Be responsible, be respectful, be safe, which are more universal and they're more global. And yes, we want kids to be those. But when it comes to expectations, we have to be extremely clear. Again, the next time you say, shh, quiet, remember you're unclear and you are reacting to behavior. And the S is a general area. How are we successful? Well, when we complete our work, we get all our catch-up work done or our homework done. We finish the test. So CHAMPS really dials in what clear and consistent expectations can look like. The common part of it is when all teachers in my building are using CHAMPS. The kiss of death for any school and any grade level or department is when teachers are using different expectations from each other. That is the kiss of death. It's called fragmentation. It's when one teacher on this side of the hallway is implementing different expectations than a teacher directly across the hallway from them. And those students might swap classrooms. There might be different expectations in the common areas like the hallways and the bathroom and recess and the bus and the cafeteria. And that is called fragmentation. Many schools are challenged with fragmentation when teachers are using different expectations. And again, challenging students find the crack. They will find the crack. And then they'll argue with you about the different expectations. Well, I get to wear a hat in her class. Why do I have to take a hat off in your class? She allows me to wear my hoodie. Why can't I wear it in your class? What's the big deal? We don't have to do this in your class. She lets us eat all the time over there. See, she has snacks for us all the time. Why can we not bring water or food into the class? So, common set of expectations gives you as a school the opportunity for what's called perpetuity. And perpetuity is when kids in pre-K or kindergarten, when they enter school, they start to learn these expectations that are going to be common throughout their entire career at that school. And by the time a kindergartner reaches first grade, they know CHAMPS. And if a first grade teacher is using CHAMPS, they don't have to do and spend a lot of time with front loading. So think about a couple things here. One is, are you using clear expectations, or are your expectations unclear? Are they inconsistent? And are they uncommon? Meaning different teachers are using different expectations. The powerful effect of clear and consistent expectations is when it becomes common throughout the entire system. Remember what I started with. Every system is currently perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. Whatever's happening or not happening in your system is going to get you results. And if you have fragmentation of expectations throughout your system, you're going to get results. Let me give you some examples in the next couple slides of what CHAMPS looks like in a school. So let's say we're transitioning from whole group to independent work time. I'm going to throw my CHAMPS expectations for independent work time on the board, and then I'm going to go into the strategy of previewing. Now, there are two parts to previewing. Let me go over the first part. The first part sounds like this. Hey, before we transition into independent work time, let me review the expectations. Our voice level or noise level should be at a level 1. Only whisper to your neighbors. If you need help, please put a sign out that I need help. I'm still working, because I'm going to be going around the room helping students, and I may not see your hand raised. The activity we're doing is completing your homework, and some of you have some work to do in your catch-up work folder. Movement, only leave your seat if you ask permission and receive permission. You should not be up out of your seat. How do you participate in this? You are working on completing your homework or anything in your catch-up folder. And to be successful, your material should be ready and available. You should be working and completing your homework. You should be remaining in your seat. And you should be only whispering to those around you, your neighbors. Let's get to work. I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes, and then it'll be time to transition to specials. That's the first part of previewing. Let me give you the second part. It goes like this. And students, as I set the timer, I'm going to remind you that if you choose to meet these, you're earning dojo points. But if you choose not to meet these, then you're choosing a structured recess today. That will be up to you. I'll set the timer. Let's get to work. That's the full two-part step of previewing. Clear expectations, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what should my movement be, what should my voice level be. The second part of previewing is, and here's what's going to happen if you choose to meet these, and here's what's going to happen if you choose not to meet these. Previewing is a very, very simple yet effective technique that we have to do really, really well. A lot of times teachers will only do the first part of previewing. but they won't explain to the students what will happen if they choose to meet or not meet the expectations. And when that happens, a student chooses not to meet the expectations, then a teacher might get into some traps: the warning trap, the questioning trap, the preaching trap, the negotiation trap, which I'll talk about in more detail a little bit later. Champs is a set of very, very clear expectations. And that's an area we have to do really, really well at. You've probably heard this before, but behavior has to be modeled, it has to be taught, it has to be reinforced, corrected, and shaped. I want to introduce a technique to you that you can use at any grade level, from pre-K all the way up through high school, because I've used it in all of those grade levels. And it's called the line. And the line is a very practical, easy, yet highly effective way to teach behavior to your students. So let me tell you about the line. What you see in front of you is a black line. That's the line. Now, I would probably draw this on a chart paper, hang it up in front of the classroom. And with my students, we're going to visit the line every day for just a few minutes. While we're visiting the line for just a few minutes, we're going to talk about behavior that is above the line and behavior that is below the line. Above the line behavior are behaviors we want to promote. We might talk about behavior like helping hands, or at the older grade levels, being honest, or trying your best, or being courteous. We're going to choose one behavior a day to talk about that's above the line. But we're also going to talk about a behavior that is below the line. Have you ever heard the saying, you crossed the line? This is the line that the person's talking about. You've crossed the line. And we're going to talk about behavior that is below the line. That would be behavior that we want to try to prevent or eliminate, but we have to teach it first. And showing this line every day to students makes behavior that is somewhat abstract more visible and concrete to them. So let me go through the line and give you some examples of above the line and below the line behaviors that we would talk about. All right, class, before we start math today, let's visit the line for just a couple minutes. Today, we're going to talk about a behavior that's called helping hands. What does it mean to you if I say helping hands? What does that mean? Can you give me some examples? Connor, thanks for raising your hand. That's right. When you pick up trash that's not even yours to help keep our classroom clean or our school clean, that would be a good example of helping hands. Samantha, thanks for raising your hand. That's right. When you hold the door open for someone, that's being courteous. That's using your hands in a helpful way. That's excellent. Every day, we're going to talk about a behavior that is above the line. Give examples, have a little discussion about it, get their point of views. Maybe we'll role play a little bit of what that behavior looks like resolving conflict. We can role play what that sounds like and looks like and feels like to resolve conflict. And then I'm going to use above the line wording throughout the day. While I observe my students, I'm going to acknowledge when they're above the line. So for example, I might say, hey guys, before we start math, I just want to tell you that I heard from the specials teachers that you guys were above the line today with your behavior while you were at specials. Nice job. 10 dojo points for everybody. You earned that for being above the line. Hey, I heard when you guys were out at recess, you were above the line. Connor, you've got your materials. That's above the line. Thank you. You guys are really, really working hard and trying your best. That is above the line. I'm going to embed that language throughout the day as we not only talk about above the line behavior for just a few minutes, I'm going to really, really embed that throughout the day so they start to connect above and below the line behaviors. We've talked about above the line behaviors. Now we have to talk about below the line behaviors. So we've talked about above the line behavior of helping hands, and there's many, many opportunities throughout the day today to help people with your hands. But we also need to talk about a below the line behavior. Today, we're going to talk about mean words. How do you feel when someone says mean words to you? What are some examples of mean words? How do you respond to someone when they use mean words toward you? How do you think the other person feels when you use mean words? So, each day we're going to visit the line and talk about above the line behaviors and below the line behaviors. But there are two other parts to the line. So I've explained to you what above the line behavior is and below the line, but there's a third component, and that is on the line behavior. And it's right there in front of you, and it's highlighted in yellow, and it says caution, caution, caution. And that is when a student is on the line with their behavior. And by the way, many of the students that I work with, the chronically disruptive maladaptive behaviors, are frequently on the line with their behavior. They're like right there. So when they're on the line with their behavior, I'm going to inform them. I'm not going to warn them. I'm going to inform them that they are on the line. And the phrasing sounds like this: Connor, it's taking you a really long time to start your work right now. We only have about 5 minutes left. You're on the line. The expectation is to be above the line. But if you choose to be on or below the line, you're choosing to stay in here for recess. I'll leave that up to you. So I'm going to try really hard not to get into a trap like warning or questioning, like, Connor, why is it taking you so long to get started? Do you know how much time we have left? Do you want to stay in for recess for the rest of your life? Is that what you want? We can make that happen. So I'm not going to question them. I'm not going to preach to them. Connor, why is it that every time we do math, okay, I'm not going to preach to them. What I'm going to do is tell them they're on the line. And that's sort of a signal to them that they're not above the line, and there's probably going to be a correction coming. So we have above the line behavior, we have below the line behavior, we have on the line behavior, and there's one more part to the line. The fourth and final component to the line is way at the bottom, and it's called bottom line behavior. These are the most egregious behaviors, and they are the non-negotiable behaviors, which means that the student's probably going to go to the office. They're probably going to have a parent meeting, or there might even be a suspension. So I'm going to front load this with them at the beginning of the year. We're not going to be visiting bottom line behaviors every day necessarily, but every once in a while, because they're on our chart paper and they can see them every day we go to the line and we talk about above and below the line behaviors, every once in a while, I'm going to remind them of bottom line behaviors. And these are non-negotiable, which means that if they choose below the line behaviors, they're choosing an office referral and maybe a suspension. So this is a very practical, easy to use, highly effective way to teach behavior. Remember, behavior has to be modeled, it has to be reinforced, it has to be corrected, it has to be shaped, and it has to be taught. We don't have to spend a lot of time teaching behavior with a strategy like the line, but we do have to do it frequently. This is an area that we have to do really, really well. Okay, so we've talked about how to have clear, consistent, common expectations. We've talked about our teacher approach being very balanced, being firm, but also flexible in how we respond to behavior in the moment. We've talked about habits, being patient with students, stepping back before we step in, training for compliance. And the next section that I want to talk to you about is how to reinforce behavior. Because remember, behavior has to be modeled, has to be taught, has to be reinforced, corrected, and shaped. And certainly all of those together help to shape behavior. You know, a lot of teachers, we try to manage behavior, but we don't get into really shaping behavior. And shaping behavior takes time. So we have to be patient with that. So this is a bucket of strategies called nudging, and nudging strategies are very powerful in terms of promoting cooperation, promoting compliance. It's a way to train for compliance. And this is the primary way that we reinforce behavior. Now, notice I didn't say reward behavior. I don't reward behavior very often because rewards are delayed. Reinforcers are immediate. And the one way to shape behavior very quickly is to reinforce behavior, not reward behavior. So all of us probably have some type of reward system in our class. You know, you earn a certain amount of points throughout the week, and then you can, access the school store. If, the class fills up the popcorn jar, once the popcorn jar is full, we're going to have a popcorn party. Those are great rewards. You should continue to do whatever you're doing with those, okay? But rewards are delayed. So the popcorn jar takes a while to fill up, and to earn enough points to access the school store, the classroom store on Friday, that takes a while. It takes all week. And those are delayed. Reinforcers are immediate. And notice I said that behavior has to be reinforced. I didn't say behavior has to be or should be rewarded. So if behavior is my left hand and reinforcers are my right hand, all behavior has to come in contact with a reinforcer. And if it doesn't, then that behavior will go away, either immediately or it'll eventually go away. And new behaviors, or behaviors you want, behaviors of meeting expectations and cooperating and all of those, well, they have to come in contact with a reinforcer, or those behaviors will never develop. That's just how behavior is. And there are all types of reinforcers. There's tangible reinforcers like tokens and edibles. And you got to be careful what state you say edibles in, but like snacks and things like that. There's also social reinforcers like verbal praise and what I call glimmer bombs, when you just just sprinkle that kid with a little bit of hope, like you're one of the smartest kids in the class. And they're not expecting it. There's lots of different types of reinforcers. Oftentimes, as teachers, we talk about, intangible and tangible reinforcers, or internal, external reinforcers. I use both, and that's the key, to use both. Don't get stuck in a trap where, you're like, well, I shouldn't have to, reward this kid for just, coming in and doing their work. The kid's in 8th grade. They should know by now. They should just be a good kid. And when teachers say something like that, I'm like, yeah, you're right. You shouldn't reward them, but you should reinforce them, because every behavior has to come in contact with a reinforcer. So this bucket of strategies over the next few slides is a way that I reinforce students, and you can reinforce students without them really even knowing that you're reinforcing them. They're called nudges. So let me go over what nudging is, and I'll give you a few examples. Okay, so here's the definition of nudging. Nudging is the use of subtle cues to influence people's actions without taking away their freedom to choose. So in practical terms, it means this. I'm going to use a nudge to get you to behave the way I want you to behave, but also with you thinking it was your idea. And you can still have the freedom of choice not to do what I want you to do. You can still choose to do something else. But I'm going to nudge you. I'm not going to prod you or cajole or bargain or cut a deal or negotiate. I'm just nudging you. And most of the time, these are subtle cues. Sometimes they're not so subtle, but a lot of times they're subtle. So the key word in here is influencing, too. Not controlling, not demanding. I'm going to try to influence you to do your work, to put your cell phone away, to line up without touching anybody, to ask permission before you leave your seat, to meet all of our expectations. I'm going to nudge you to do those. You can still choose to not meet those expectations, but I'm going to nudge you to. And by the way, if you choose not to meet those expectations, there's a correction that's going to happen. Okay, so as adults, nudging is all around us. I just want you to open your eyes. You've probably been nudged today already. If you look at your phone, don't look at your phone right now, but if you look at your phone, you've probably been nudged by advertisements. You know, if you go on Amazon and you're looking to buy something, it might say something like only 4 left in stock, right? And your brain's like, I better buy that before, it's out of stock. That's a nudge. And so we use scarcity of time, like sale ends tonight, or only 24 hours, or sale ends this weekend. We use scarcity of product. There's only 4 left. If you go to Kohl's department store, they have Kohl's cash. You go to Menards, they have Menards rebates. Those are all nudges. You know how many people use rebates, like actually turn in their rebates? Not many. The percentage is very low. That's why they still use them. So as humans, as adults, we're nudged all the time. We just have to open our eyes to it. I'm going to give you some examples of adult nudging, and then we're going to go into, well, practically, how do I nudge students in my classroom? So here's a typical nudge you might find at a restaurant, maybe at your local coffee shop, and it's called the decoy. And if you look at these cups of coffee, there's the small for $2.75, and then it jumps to $3.25 for the medium. So it's a pretty sizable jump. But then the large is closely priced next to the medium. So the medium is not designed to sell well. In fact, we don't even care if it sells at all. We don't want you to buy the small, we want you to buy the large. So the nudge in your brain is, well, wow, I could buy a large for just 50 cents or 25 cents more than the medium. That would be irresponsibly financially if I wouldn't choose that. I'm making a really good financial decision if I buy the large. The whole goal is we want you to spend more money, and we don't want you to purchase the small. We want you can still choose to purchase the small or the medium, but we're nudging you to make a good financial decision and spend more money. And that's called the decoy. So sometimes you'll go into a restaurant and they'll have a decoy in the appetizer menu. And it's the item that's usually at the top of the appetizer menu. It's usually priced 2 or 3 times more expensive than the other ones. Like nachos might be $25, and you're like, I don't think I want to spend that kind of money on an appetizer. But then you'll go down the list and you'll be like, well, I'll take the Caesar salad for $7. I'll have an appetizer, and cha-ching, we got your money. So that's an example of a decoy, an example of an adult nudge. Well, let's take this concept and put it into our classrooms to nudge our students to cooperate with us, to meet expectations. So nudges are very playful. Remember, there's lots of different ways to reinforce. There's social reinforcers, there's tangible reinforcers. And here's a nudge to reinforce my students for doing the right thing, and it's called the on a roll list. My students didn't make the traditional honor roll in high school. But I wanted to recognize them. It's a social nudge for when they did some small things that were helpful, like pick up a piece of paper that wasn't theirs and help clean our classroom up, or they opened the door for somebody that said a nice word. Yes, we expect them to do that, but remember, all behavior has to come in contact with a reinforcer, right? And this is a reinforcer. So I had an honor roll list, and the only sort of rule I had with it was that any teacher or staff member throughout the building could nominate any of my students for Mr. Dill's honor roll list at any time for really anything that they wanted to. We just wanted to recognize that, hey, you're on a roll with your behavior here. Again, when my kids were not in my class, I wanted them to continue to think, I can't wait to get back there. I want to be in his class. I didn't want students to think, I don't want to go to this class. So I had a tardy ticket system, and a tardy ticket system was that if you were in your seat when the bell rang, you take a look underneath your seat. There might be a ticket under there. If there's a ticket, then you earned a fast pass through the lunch line, or you earned a homework pass you could use anytime in the future, or a test pass, or you could choose your homework tonight, or you could choose your own seat because I had assigned seating. So they never knew when they were going to earn the ticket, but if they were in their seat when the bell rang, then there's a chance that they could earn some type of reinforcer. Notice I said the word earn. I didn't say the word give. I didn't give them homework passes. I didn't give them fast passes through the lunch line. I didn't give them the opportunity to sit where they wanted to sit. They earned it. And how they earned it is when they were in their seat when the bell rang. They could still choose not to, and some of them did, right? But this was a nudge to have them come to class. Attendance goes up, tardiness goes down, and it's not perfect, but it's a tailwind. It'll help promote cooperative behavior. I would use the goose. The goose is a stuffed animal you can buy at the pet store that you train your dog to fetch. And I would have that out on my desk. And if kids came in and they saw that the goose was on my desk, they'd say something like, "He's going to goose someone today." And I would jokingly say, "Okay, today someone's going to get goosed. You can see I have the goose out." The goose stands for get out of school early. Now, you couldn't leave the classroom. You couldn't leave campus or anything like that. But if you were goosed during my class, you were done with my class for that day. So if we had a test at the end of the class and you were goosed, you didn't have to take the test. If we had homework that night and you were goosed, didn't have to do homework. And so this is actually a technique called negative reinforcement. And negative reinforcement is when you are compliant, the negative stimulus is eliminated. So if homework was seen as a negative stimulus, when you were at class and you were participating and you were goosed, you didn't have to do the homework. So we oftentimes use positive reinforcement, but we can also use negative reinforcement as well. And some teachers get confused about negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is just when a negative stimulus is removed when a person complies with expectations. So for example, if you go out in your car today and you start driving away without putting your seatbelt on, and don't do that, you definitely want to put your seatbelt on. But if you choose to drive away out of the parking lot or your driveway without your seatbelt clicked in, you might hear something like this in your car. Beep, 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 this annoying noise. And that noise will go away as soon as you comply and put your seatbelt in. That's an example of negative reinforcement that's built into adult life. They want to promote safety. They want to promote safe driving, and part of that is putting your seatbelt on. And yes, that's being responsible, and yes, that's being respectful, and yes, that's being safe. But they use a nudge, and the nudge is negative reinforcement built into your car. Now, you can still choose not to put your seatbelt on and wait it out and see how long it'll take before that irritating noise goes away. So again, it's a nudge is I'm influencing you to meet expectations, to cooperate, to put your seatbelt on, and the dinging goes away or the irritating noise goes away, but you could still choose not to put your seatbelt on, right? You can still choose that, and that's a nudge. So we can use positive reinforcement. We can also use negative reinforcement in our nudges. Here's another example of a nudge that I would use in class at the beginning of the year. I'd have my students fill out a secret agent card, and we'd have do some fake fingerprinting because the real fingerprints were already taken. But we'd have some fake fingerprints, and then they'd come up with a secret agent name like Hawkeye, and then I'd put those away, and I would pull those out and say, "Hey, before we start our math lesson, we're going to play the secret agent game during our math lesson. And if our secret agent has a brilliant lesson, everybody in here earns a homework pass they can use anytime in the future." Okay, so we'd go through the lesson. At the end of the lesson, I'd say, "Hey, you've got about a minute left before class ends. You guys have homework tonight. I want you to do the odd problems through 17, and then we'll check them in the morning. But let's announce our secret agent. Drum roll, please." Kids would do a drum roll, and I would announce the secret agent is Josh. Nice job, Josh. Josh had his materials today. Josh was participating in class. Nice job. Because he met those expectations, everyone in here earns a homework pass they can use anytime in the future. And so now, if Josh didn't have a good lesson, if the secret agent didn't have a good lesson, I'd say something like, hey, you got about a minute left. You guys have homework tonight. I just want to say that our secret agent did not have a good lesson today. We're going to have to try this again some other time. So something like the secret agent creates curiosity. Nobody knows really who it is except for me. And the really neat thing is, even if I pull the kid's card out and I'm like, okay, I don't want that kid as a secret agent today, I could use a different name because nobody knows who the secret agent is during the lesson when I pull it out. So it just promotes more cooperation. It promotes joy. It promotes, it influences them to be there in class and participate in class. If you're not nudging, then you're probably just expecting kids to come into your class and just do what they should do as students. And you're going to run into kids who are like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do your work, and I'm not going to take my hoodie off, and I'm not going to stay in my seat, and I'm not going to do what you want me to do. Because sometimes they operate on not avoidance and escape or attention, but they operate on power and control. And so remember this, cooperation from a student is voluntary, not mandatory. They voluntarily give it to you. It's not mandatory that they comply. So we have to nudge that voluntary cooperation. And that's what nudging is about. So think about different nudges that you could use in your class. And these come in the form of game theory. They're playful, they're reinforcing. You can also not only use positive reinforcement, but again, you could use negative reinforcement. So nudges are these subtle cues. They don't even know they're being nudged to get them to behave in a way you want them to behave with them thinking it was their idea to behave. There's one more nudge that I want to show you. It's called the scoreboard. If any of you have been trained in whole brain teaching by Chris Biffle, you know the scoreboard. You may have used a form of the scoreboard. I use the scoreboard quite a bit. You can use it tomorrow. Like you could use it today. If you're watching this in the middle of the day, you could use it in your next class. The scoreboard is basically this. Give them something to chase after. That's the reinforcer. Maybe it's 5 minutes of extra recess. Maybe it's a homework pass. Maybe it's a fast pass through the lunch line. Maybe it's a test pass. Maybe it's sit where you want and you have assigned seating, but you can choose to sit where you want. And here's how the scoreboard works. It's not teacher against students. It's students against themselves. And it goes like this. Class, how many of you would love to earn an extra 5 minutes of recess? Yeah? All right. So here's the deal. For the next 10 minutes during our lesson, we're going to play the scoreboard. When you're meeting expectations, you're going to earn points under the smiley face. But when you choose not to, you're going to earn points under the frowny face. I'm not judging you on this. I'm just the referee. I'm just going to give you a score, and I'm going to mark it on the whiteboard because you're going to have this on the whiteboard. And when they're meeting expectations, thanks for raising your hand. Boop, there's a mark under the smiley face. Oh, somebody blurted out. Boop, there's a mark under the frowny face. So you're just keeping score of their behavior, whether they're meeting expectations or not meeting expectations. But I'm nudging them because they're chasing after 5 minutes of extra recess or whatever you have for them to chase after. Remember this, kids are going to chase after something. Give them something to chase after, right? Okay, so at the end of the 10 minutes, if they have more smiley faces and frowny faces, they've earned 5 minutes of extra recess or whatever they're chasing after. You'll also notice I have the guff counter in there. Now, guff is for attitude. If there's one thing that drives me crazy as a teacher, I don't know about you, but for me, it's when kids give attitude. Oh, jeez. Seriously? We already did this. The eye rolls, the sighs, the head on their desk. That's kind of attitude. It's really low behavior, low level behavior, but it does get under my skin. So I try to use a nudge when I anticipate or can sense that there's some attitude going on. So I'll say something like this, like I've been seeing some attitude and hearing some attitude from you guys, and I'm going to help you out. I'm going to add the guff counter to the scoreboard. And if I see or hear guff from any of you, that's a mark under the frowny face. But if I'm not seeing it or not hearing it, then that is a mark under the smiley face. So all of a sudden, you've introduced this wonderful technique in the behavior world called omission training. It's actually when you reinforce a behavior when it's not present, when it's omitted. So when they're not guffing, when they're not showing attitude, then they earn points under the smiley face. But when they do show guff, it's points under the frowny face. So that's omission training. And then you'll see that there's an independent group. So if you use this and you have a really challenging kid in your class, let's say it's Josh, Josh is going to get a lot of marks under the frowny face. And kids are like about ready to throttle him because they're like, we can't earn the recess because Josh keeps talking out or he keeps getting out of his seat. Um, or he doesn't follow directions first time given. Like all those marks under the frowny face are Josh's. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll separate Josh and put Josh in an independent group. So anything that he does doesn't affect the rest of the class. And I'll certainly tell Josh, if you want to get with the rest of the class on the scoreboard, just say, Mr. Dill, I want to get with the rest of the class. I don't want to be by myself anymore. But I will tell him, Josh, if you keep getting frowny face points, then you're going to be in an independent group. And don't worry about shaming or blaming in this one because, and I'm not about shaming or blaming, we don't want to do that. But don't worry about that because every kid in your class is thinking, when is he going to take care of Josh? Because we can't ever earn whatever it is they're chasing after. So the scoreboard is very playful. We only use it for a few minutes at a time. Don't use it for the whole day. Don't use it for the whole hour. Remember, you're training for compliance, right? And when you train to do something, you typically train in little bits and pieces at a time. And so I'm training them to cooperate, not demanding, training them. And I use things like nudges to promote cooperation. Okay, so we talked about reinforcing, and now we got to go to the section of correction. How do you correct behavior when it happens? Okay, the last element of our training is how to correct behavior. So behavior has to be modeled, taught, reinforced, and corrected. That means we respond to behavior. So what are the key elements of responding to behavior, or some of the key principles? One is, remember, conflict is inevitable, but combat's optional. You don't have to get into combat here. Some teachers will tell me, you got to pick your battles with this kid. And I'll say, there are no battles to pick. We're not going to pick any battles. So remember to respond with strategy, not emotion. If you say, shh, quiet, that's responding with a reaction, an emotion, not really with a strategy. Hold the boundary, not the battle. Hold the boundary. Don't give in on the boundary. If you say, this is what we're going to do, or no, we're not going to do that, hold that boundary. But make sure you have a connection with a student before you go into correction with a student. Connection is so much more powerful than correction. Some people just, parents and teachers just launch into correction without really having a connection with kids. And choose your words very, very wisely. We'll talk about some phrasing that you can use when you're responding to behavior when it happens. As disruptive or defiant or disrespectful behavior is happening, you're going to encounter tactics. Tactics are, they're nasty. That's what they are. I call them the cafe. They confuse us, they annoy us, they frustrate us, and they exhaust us. Like if you ever been exhausted after being with a student and encountering a student with a behavior, you've probably dealt with some tactics. Well, maybe you didn't deal with them, but you've been hit with some tactics. All right, so that's what tactics are designed to do. And anybody who's misbehaving is going to use a tactic. Here's how you know if a maladaptive student is using a tactic. You ready? Here's how for sure you know. When they open their mouth. Yep, that's how you know. Okay? They'll pick at the details. They'll pretend not to listen. They'll justify their behavior. They'll argue with you about it. They blame something or someone else. That's called the jab. Justify, argue, blame. They'll be intentionally vague. They'll nitpick at every little detail. Like you didn't tell us it was due today, or you didn't tell us it was due today, or you didn't tell us it was due today. I can pick that thing apart lots of different ways. So those are called tactics. They can get nasty too. They can get really personal. Like, Mrs. Johnson, what happened to your ankles? You had them before lunch. Poof, they're gone. Yeah. Are you gay? Because we all call you Skittles. ow. Um, yeah, they can get, and so don't let them get under your skin. Just recognize in your brain, these are tactics. They're behavioral tactics. When a kid's arguing with you, when they're justifying their behavior, what they did or didn't do, when they blame, that's like the number one tactic. Because tactics then, if we get confused, which we will, and we get exhausted, which we will, it's going to lead us into traps. And traps is a place you do not want to be as a teacher. We'll talk about that next. There are these traps that we get into as teachers, and there are 4 or 5 main traps there in front of you. The first one is the warning trap. I've talked to you about this. There is a day of warning in your school year, and it's the first day, August 13th, the first day of school. And you can tell your students, today I'm going to warn you, tomorrow corrections start, and have corrections. If you continue to warn them, then you are falling into the warning trap and you're actually going to reinforce the behavior you want to eliminate. Because whatever you allow and permit, and warnings permit, and they allow behavior to occur again and again and again. Whatever you allow and permit, you reinforce to occur again. So warn them once, that's at the first day of school, and then start corrections. Okay. Don't question behavior in the middle of behavior. So if students are supposed to be silent and you hear chattering, don't ask, excuse me, who's chattering? Why do I hear chattering? Is there supposed to be chattering? Don't ask. If they're supposed to be starting their work and they're not starting their work, don't ask, why are you not doing your work? What are you supposed to be doing? If they're supposed to have their Chromebook closed, don't ask, why is your Chromebook still open? Remember, there are only expectations to meet and not meet. You don't have to question. And if you blow because you can't take it anymore, usually teachers get into the preaching trap. And this is when they preach to a student about anything and everything they've ever done right or never done wrong. Did I say that right? They preach to them about anything and everything they've done wrong and anything and everything they've never done right. There we go. Yeah, that's the preaching trap. And then don't cut deals with kids. That's called the negotiation trap. If you say, hey, I'll make you a deal, they will make a deal with you. They will negotiate. And then the cure-all trap. So the cure-all trap is when a teacher uses the clip system and believes that's going to cure all behavior. And that teacher will clip a student down for any type of behavior. And then there's a lot of judgment in there. Should I clip the kid down? Should I not? Should I clip him down to yellow? How many times have I warned them before I clip him down to yellow? It's just a mess. It is an absolute mess. Now it'll work with always kids, but they really don't need a clip chart. Most of them are all the way up on green. And then teachers who fumble around with the clip chart, they start adding colors to the clip chart. Like it's supposed to be green, yellow, red, and then they add orange and they add purple into it, and it's just gets to be a mess. And it's the cure-all trap. They think that's going to cure all behavior. You'll have to have nudges. You have to stay balanced. You'll have to use choice language. You'll have to have a ladder of limits more than a clip, or whatever you're using. So assertive discipline at the high school, that's a cure-all trap. I'm not saying they're not good, they're not effective for always kids, but we're not talking about the always kids today. We're talking about the never kids. We're talking about the kids that are going to make you want to quit and work at Walmart. So yeah, these are the traps, and we've all been in them. Like I've been in them, and in fact, I still get into some of them. So I try not to, and that's the point. Try not to get into these traps. All right, so I've come up with this great strategy that I use to deal with tactics and traps. First of all, you have to detect that you're being hit by tactics and that you're going to step into a trap. So just turn on your tactic detector at 6 o'clock in the morning, right when you get up, before you even go into school. And then when you hear a tactic, when that detector's going off, detach yourself personally. Just be like, okay, this is just business. It's called behavior business. I'm not going to take this personal. And then disconnect emotionally. Um, just become neutral. Don't throw some emotional fuel on the fire. Don't become emotionally charged with this. Don't blow, so to speak. Don't react. And then use a diffuser. This helps to diffuse, to pull the plug out, to diffuse any type of irresponsible excitement, emotion from the student. Um, it'll help diffuse. And the two that I like to use are regardless and nevertheless. You didn't tell us it was due today. Regardless, it's due today. How come we don't? You might have a scorekeeper. How come she has to keep she gets to keep her Chromebook open, but I don't? Regardless, close your Chromebook. So that you have to recognize or detect the tactic, and then you have to detach, disconnect, and then use a diffuser. I also like to use humor. That's called harmless humor. Don't use harmful humor. Sarcasm is an example of harmful humor, and I try not to use that because you never know when you're gonna crush a kid's spirit, and sarcasm will do that very fast. And if you do that, then your ability to really shape behavior is gone. It's just gone because the kid's not going to respect you, and there'll be um, bitterness or resentfulness because you threw a little sarcasm. So use harmless humor, not harmful humor. A lot of times I like to make fun of myself, using humor. So, if a kid's talking, I might say, oh, hold on a minute. Let me put my old man glasses on and turn up my old man hearing because I think I see and hear you talking. I do. And if you talk again, then you're going to choose to pay 5 points, right? Something like that. Just a little bit of humor to disarm. So this is called the 4Ds, and use it when you recognize that there's tactics that might lead you into traps because they're everywhere and they're all the time when you're dealing with a maladaptive student. I wish I would have known this when I first started teaching. I would have used this from day one, and it's called a ladder of limits. So this is called the behavioral framework, which is in front of you. You see the expectations off to the left, and you can choose any type of expectations. Just make sure your expectations are clear and you're consistent. So notice it says follow directions first time, because if it just says follow directions, then you're going to have a kid who's like, yeah, I'll do that in about 20 minutes. I'll start my work. But right now I want to play, they'll follow directions, but it might be like slow to comply or slow to follow directions. So make sure your directions are clear. You might have to dial them in a little bit. And then there are two choices students can make. You see those in the center. They could choose to meet or not meet. And if they choose to meet expectations, boom, we go to the reinforcer. If you meet an expectation, that behavior is going to be met with a reinforcer. And then if you choose not to, I'm not going to warn you, question you, preach to you, negotiate anything with you. I'm not going to get into a trap with you. I'm going to go straight to corrections. So this is called a ladder of limit. It's the bottom right. You see not meeting expectations, and I have a list of things. So this is a flexible consequence hierarchy, meaning this is the flexible part of the Twizzler teacher. So I can flex up and down this ladder, or I can step in sequence down the ladder. So at the top of the ladder, you see the 3 R's. That's redirect, redo, and reset. Those are my 3 R's. Those are kind of grounding techniques. And if a student is distracted, maybe slow to comply, I'll probably start with the 3 R's with them. Very minor behavior. I'm not dealing with major behavior. I'm dealing with very minor. So read it as minor behavior. Don't read it as major behavior, and your brain's going to get pissed off at the kid and frustrated because they're slow to comply. It's just minor behavior. And I might do a reset or a redo with them. Maybe if they continue with the behavior, like talking out, it's move their seat. And by the way, I'm not moving their seat. I don't say, if you continue to talk, I'm going to move your seat over here. That's not what's happening, right? So if they continue to talk, they're choosing for their seat to be moved. And that language, remember I said choose your words wisely. That language is very, very important. I also have refocus plans, think plans, reset sheets that I use. So if a student continues to talk out, they chose to have their seat moved. If they continue to talk out again, the next step might be a think plan. Um, I have not earning tokens. I have paying tokens back because I run a token system, or you might run a point system. You got to run some type of a system. Um, and then I have conversations with kids. At the elementary level, I use structured recess. Structured recess is when they are allowed to go to recess outside, for example, but it's structured. You tell them what to do. They don't get a free will. I can play, soccer with my friends. I'm outside getting some fresh air and moving my body, but I'm probably standing by the teacher doing calisthenics. Um, Parent call or meeting. Behavior Academy is when a student needs to spend some time learning about their behavior. That's usually during lunch and lunch recess or study time. And it's with me, the teacher, so it takes some time on my part. And I'm usually having them complete a think plan or a refocus plan. Um, you know, what how did they get here? What's their behavior? What can they do differently? Those are the types of things that we're going to talk about. I'm not going to preach to them during that, but they're going to learn about the behavior and the hurt and the harm. And then you can see peer-to-peer mediations, office referrals, removal or isolation. So that's the bottom of the list. So my point is that this is progressive. It's in sequence. So it goes from minor to major behavior and correction. However, you can flex up and down this ladder if you need to, depending upon the behavior the student's emitting. So if they're like distracted, slightly distracted, and maybe you do a redirect with them and their brain gets fired up and you need to pop down to a conversation with them, you're skipping, the next 4 or 5 steps. That's fine. That's how this is designed. As you go down the ladder, if you step down the ladder, the consequences get more intense and it makes it a little bit more uncomfortable for the student to resist you than to cooperate with you. That's the way it's designed. So, having your seat moved or you choosing to have your seat moved is less intensive than having to stay in from recess or study time for a behavior academy, okay, and completing a think plan or having a parent meeting. So when we go down the ladder, it gets more intensive. And this is the flexible part of the Twizzler teacher. Firm on the expectations. You can choose to meet or not meet. I'm not cutting a deal with you. I'm not going to warn you. I'm not going to question you. You're the choose going to meet or not meet. If you choose to meet, you are earning a reinforcer. But if you choose not to meet, then I don't warn you, don't question. I go straight to my ladder of limits. There are 5 types of corrections. A lot of people, these, but you don't think about them a lot. I think about them all the time because I'm like, okay, what type of correction am I going to use for this behavior? So you can't use the same correction for all behavior, right? You got to think about, okay, well, what types of corrections am I going to use? Because you have some available. Natural corrections, that means no adult intervention. You don't study for your test, you're probably going to get a poor grade. That's natural. Conventional is punitive. You do this, you're going to lose a privilege to do this. Then there's restorative. You do this, you got to make it right? You got to fix it, you got to repair, you got to restore. Usually that's with relationship because it's a little bit different than logical, although logical, which is the gold standard of corrections, is like, okay, well, the punishment has to meet the crime, has to fit the crime, right? If you destroy the Chromebook, you pay for it. Now that might sound restorative, like, okay, I destroyed the Chromebook and I got to repay it. I'm restoring the Chromebook. And that's why restorative is usually with relationships. Like if you cuss someone out or you're bullying someone or you get into a fight, a physical fight, we do a peer-to-peer mediation. That is definitely a restorative type of correction. But if you destroy the bathroom, you're going to clean up the bathroom. That would be logical. Okay. So logical is like the gold standard. We just want to be logical with it. And the preventative is like moving the seat. in the last section of the ladder of limits. If a student chooses to have their seat moved, that's a preventative. I'm going to try to do that environmental move to try to prevent that behavior from occurring again. That would be a type of correction. Okay, so there's the ladder of limits, and then there are 5 types of corrections that you can have in your ladder, and you should have in your ladder. And then you can align these types of corrections in your ladder, which I'll show you next. So once you develop a ladder of limits, which you can see over on my left, on the left of this slide, then you can take those 5 corrections and align the consequence type up to the actual correction on your ladder. And you can see, am I too heavy on punitive? Do I not have enough restorative in there? So you might look at your ladder and be like, wow, I don't have any type of restorative. So I need to build in a restorative conversation in there. Or I have more punitive than anything. I don't really have logical consequences. I don't have any natural consequences. So just do a ladder and then do a quick alignment to see if you're too heavy or too light on consequence types, and then you can start adjusting that as needed. When you're setting the limit, from your ladder of limits, do not use war words. These are no-no words because you're going to have conflict. And we do it all the time. I still do it. And I've been working on this for 30 years. And I'm like, you need to close your Chromebook because my brain's like fired up with this kid and I want to throttle them because they're not complying. So, and it's frustrating. It's like, just close your Chromebook or just line up or just start your work or just shut your mouth and raise your hand. This is so easy. Why can't you do this? But you have to choose your words very carefully. So these are called war words. They create or continue conflict. Don't use them. And they sound like this. Connor, you need to close your Chromebook. Hunter, I need you to start your work now. The reality is they don't need to do those things. They don't. You want them to, but they don't need to. They need air, water, and food. That's it. That's all they need. Sometimes they don't even need clothes. I'm not kidding you. I've worked with some kids who they come off the bus and they're derobed. I'm like, what? Where? Go put your clothes on. Now I will say you need to put your clothes on. Like I worked with one student who he was in a harness on a bus and he would still get to school without his clothes. So the little turkey would just take his clothes off. So I learned over time we don't use war words. You must, you should, you have to, because they don't have to, they don't need to. The expectation is to do these things, and then you leave it up to them. Shift the power to them. When you use words that are war words, the power stays here and the control stays here, and you don't want that. You want to influence them, but you don't want to control them, or you don't want to signal you have the power, because then you're really going to have a war on your hands. So what should you say instead? I'll show you that next. There is a therapeutic approach called choice language therapy, and it's CLT. Now, we're not therapists, but we are going to use that type of language from that therapeutic approach. And so a lot of teachers will say, oh, I give choice all the time. They will think, oh, I give choice all the time, but they don't. They think it, but their brain's lying to them. Like they're off because now they may offer organizational choice, like do you want to use a smelly marker or do you want to use the pencil? Do you want to sit here for reading in the beanbag or do you want to sit over there? It's your choice. They might do that, but I'm talking, yes, that's choice, but that's not choice language in terms of behavioral choice. So this is when behavior is happening. We have to dial our language in, and I would recommend you use this choice language because it shifts the power to them, takes it off of you, puts it into them. So here are some phrases. They're in front of you. The expectation is close your Chromebook. The expectation is to line up, hands, feet, body to self. The expectation is to be a level 0, no talk. The expectation is to start your work. The expectation is to complete your assignment. The expectation is what you're going to say that so much you're going to puke. Now that doesn't fix behavior, because a lot of teachers, once they learn this, I'll go into their classrooms and they're using the expectation is the expectation, and they're thinking, okay, well, why isn't behavior getting better? It's because they're still getting into warnings, the warning trap, the questioning trap. They're not reinforcing behavior. They're not using nudges. So they have a good start, but this is not the only thing that's going to fix behavior. This is a starting point. Okay. So the expectation is close your Chromebook. The choice is yours. If you choose not to, you're choosing to lose your Chromebook for 2 days. The expectation is to be at a level 0. If you choose to talk, you're choosing for your seat to be moved. The expectation is to start your work. If you don't start your work let me set the timer, within 10 seconds, then you're choosing not to earn points. The expectation is whatever it is, right? And then if you choose not to meet it, this is what's going to happen. You go to your ladder of limits. I'll leave that up to you. So this is really, really powerful. I was doing this training, I think it was last year. I think it was in the past year. And a teacher said to me, she was in the audience, and the teacher raised her hand and said, I want to talk about my 10-year-old son. I'm like, okay, like your 10-year-old son, not a student in your class, your own 10-year-old son. She's like, yeah, I want to talk about my 10-year-old son. I go, okay, let's go. I said, what's the situation? She said, last Saturday, I was in the kitchen cooking breakfast, and he walked into the kitchen, this is a 10-year-old, and said, Mom, I'm going to go ride my bike. Now, he had been grounded from his bike. I don't know why he was grounded, but Mom and Dad, the teacher and her husband, grounded him from riding his bike. He said, Mom, I'm going to go ride my bike. She looked at him and said, you're not going to ride your bike. You're grounded from your bike. And he looked back at her and said, I'm going to go ride my bike. Whoa. I said, what'd you do? She said, I turned around and I pointed to him and I said, you will not ride your bike. And he in turn looked back at me and said, I'm going to go ride my bike. So she said, I left. I started walking down the hallway and he followed me and he kept saying, I'm going to go ride my bike. And she said, finally, I turned around and I screamed at him, you are grounded. You will not ride your bike. Okay, so you hear the war words that she's using? You will not. And then she said, I don't know, I'm so frustrated, I don't know what to do. It's because she's been hit with tactics. And now she's in traps, multiple traps. And then her language is off, and she's off balance. She's not a Twizzler teacher. Now she's hostile and punitive. Okay, see how this works? And it happens like that. So she asked, what do I do? In a situation like that, what do I do? I said, remember that conflict is inevitable, right? Combat's optional. And then I asked her, why are you in battle with him? Why are you in conflict with him? Remember, hold the boundary, not the battle. So, and then use choice language and go to your ladder of limits. And it would sound like this. If you choose to ride your bike, fine. But you're choosing not to ride your bike for a year because it'll be put away, locked up. That's your choice. I'll leave that up to you. I'm not going to battle with him. If he wants to go ride his bike, let him ride his bike. But the consequence or the correction for disobeying that you're grounded from your bike is that you're going to lose your bike. That's a natural consequence, right? Well, it's a punitive consequence because there's an adult intervention. It's a punitive, and it should be, right? It's a logical one. If you're arguing with me and you choose to ride your bike, you're choosing not to have your access to your bike for a year. If you choose not to close your Chromebook, you're choosing not to use your Chromebook for a day or two. If you choose to get in a fight at recess, you're choosing to make that up, like to repair it through a peer-to-peer mediation meeting, but you're probably choosing to lose access to recess for a while, right? So, but here's the key is the language that we use, So you can use choice language in setting limits. Well, that's our training for today. If you're sitting next to someone, turn to them and say, hallelujah, our training is over. So if you want to learn more about strategies to prevent behavior, but also how to respond to behavior, you can find everything that we talked about and more in my book that I wrote, which is entitled Up Yours. Yes, it's a play on words. It's about upping your skills, going to the next level with your behavior skills as a teacher, as a paraprofessional, as whatever role that you have in schools. The best place to find it is either on Amazon or my website, showandtellconsulting.com. You can go to the book section and order it straight from the publisher. They have a print on demand service, and it'll come to you within a couple days. Thank you for joining me today. Hopefully, I'll see you down the road.